You're listening to the Nonprofit State of Minds podcast, an Angel Oak creative production.
Hey everybody, David Chatham here with Angel Oak Creative. Welcome to our latest episode of Nonprofit State of Minds, where we kind of pick the brains of nonprofit influencers, leaders, folks who just have something to say about the subject. So grateful. We've had some great guests and really grateful for those. Today is no exception. We have Dr. Sarah Glova. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you so much. Excited to be here.
Sarah is speaker, researcher, and just amazingly smart about all things strategic planning, nonprofit, goal setting. I'll let her tell you more, but she is a TEDx speaker and has worked with many nonprofits and for-profits for that matter, helping them to chart a course forward. So thank you for being here, Sarah.
Oh, thanks for having me. What a lovely introduction. Thank you. I
Oh,
appreciate that.
well, I try to get people to say good stuff about me, but I definitely want to say good stuff about other people. Well, yeah, well, tell us a little bit about you. What's your background? How'd you get here? How'd you begin working with nonprofits? What was that journey like?
Yeah, I'll make a long story short for this one because I know for our listeners here, we're focusing on nonprofits, which is such a gift. I don't get to talk about nonprofits every day.
Well, good.
The
I'm glad we're giving you that opportunity.
It's perfect. I love it. And I wanted, when I shared my introduction, I wanted to mention the first kind of touch point that I had with nonprofits.
Hmm.
And it's the Boys and Girls Club. That's the first one
Oh, yeah.
I can really remember. So when my parents separated and my mom moved us down to North Carolina, single mom, four girls, we spent a lot of time at the Boys and Girls Club of Pitt County.
Oh,
And so as I was thinking about, that's not something I think gotten to share in an introduction before, but as I was thinking about, what's my first memory of, nonprofit and nonprofit work, it would be Boys and Girls Club.
so they were influential even as a child, nonprofit work.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I haven't really had that. I haven't really gone back to think about what my first exposure to a nonprofit was. I think I was in like the Law Explorers or something back in elementary school or junior high or something, and I think that was
Mhm.
probably the first. But no, that's a neat perception. So
That was you can guess, that was quite a few years ago now. Things we
I
won't
have a feeling mine was much further back than yours.
I don't
So.
know. It was a while back, but I do remember that experience, and I think it's fun to think about the impact of organizations like that as we think about our backgrounds. I'm somebody who I was always very interested in school and academics, and I have my PhD in curriculum and instruction focused on adult learning. But I remember even back at the Boys and Girls Club that I was somebody who wanted to sit down and focus on my homework and Boys and Girls Clubs can be a wonderfully loud place, like good loud, good happy noise. And I just remember some influential folks there who would always help me find a quiet spot to work on my homework or read or do things like that. And so that nerdiness was there very early. And then in my work now, you mentioned goal setting. So I do a lot of research on achievement. I teach at Duke and NC State, and I have a TEDx talk about how to achieve your goals with just a single page. And that's a big part of my work is simplifying goals and big plans and what we'll talk about today,
Yeah.
strategic plans, so that they're easy to keep in front of us, easy to keep in mind, usually just on a single page.
Yeah, which we love. You and I talked a little bit about Angel Oak's brand canvas, which we call a brand on one page, and
Yeah.
we love, yes, we love brevity and conciseness. So I think uh, that is a great um, aspiration for most people because I think most nonprofits are going, what? How in the world can I get my strategic plan basically right? How can I get my next
This binder? You want me to
yeah,
get this
right.
binder on a
So how can I get that all on one page? So I'm looking forward to having that conversation. I mean, we can jump right in there. Do you want to give us a little more background on kind of how you some of the work that you do with nonprofits, or maybe some, just kind of examples of what that looks like, just
Yeah,
to.
absolutely. I don't want to give you trivia that I didn't warn you about
You can
this.
give trivia, name drop. You
But
can
I
do whatever
thought
you want to.
I thought I wanted to ask you, one of the first nonprofits that I worked with is the National Association of Women Business Owners. So I
Okay.
started my own company back in 2012. I mentioned I come from academia, so I was at NC State at the time. I didn't know anything about starting a business. If you have anyone who is listening to this podcast and knows anything about business or entrepreneurship, I didn't even know what a P&L was. I remember somebody
Oh,
mentioning a P&L, and I was like,
yeah.
"What? That sounds like something I should know." I knew very little. I knew what I wanted to have my company focus on, and that was it. And so I joined an organization called the National Association of Women Business Owners, hoping to learn what I didn't know. And so here's the trivia. Well, first I can ask, have you heard of that organization by chance?
I have not.
Great. So then best of luck on my trivia question. So,
I'll give it a run.
so there was a time in our history, in US history, when if you were a female business owner, banks could require that you had a male relative
Hmm.
sign with you.
Wow.
So even if you were 100% owner of your business, even if you were in good financial standing, as a female business owner, banks could require that you had a male relative, even someone who wasn't involved in the business at all
Wow.
with you.
That I did not know that. And
Yeah, so
how
here's the
far
fun.
back was this, you think?
You read my mind.
Oh,
So trivia, when do
oh,
you think this went away?
I
When,
know what I'd like to think it went
you
away.
can tell me both. When you would
You
like to
know,
think, right, at the
I
dawn of
mean, I would
time.
like to think it would have gone away in like, the 40s or something, right? Um, I'm gonna go the other way though. I'm gonna say like the 70s.
Yeah, so good guess. Good guess. You were close. The bill that made it illegal for banks to require women business owners to have a male relative cosigner was signed into law in 1988
No way.
under the Reagan administration.
Wow.
Yeah, HR 5050 is that legislation.
That is crazy.
Isn't it crazy? And so that is
Angel Oak's a woman-owned business as well.
Mhm.
Remind people, Caitlin Kleinert Elliott is our founder and uh, one of the lady bosses, as some people call them. It just she crushes it. So
Yeah,
that's interesting. Wow.
Caitlin's amazing. And I will say, I don't want to speak for Caitlin's timeline, but 1988, I mean, that's within the timeline of my life. So
Yeah.
knowing that I was alive now, I was not quite old enough to have a business yet, but I existed in a
Yeah.
time where it was still legal for banks to require that was legal, that was allowed, and it wasn't made illegal until HR 5050, which again passed in 1988. And so the reason I
Crazy.
bring that up is the National Association of Women Business Owners, NAWBO, called NABO a lot,
Yeah.
was an organization that advocated for that legislative change. And there was a Greater Raleigh chapter. So that organization was founded in the 70s. And
Hmm.
also in the 70s, the Greater Raleigh chapter was created. It was one of the first chapters in the nation. And so after 2012, when I joined, I was joining an organization that had advocated for women business owners for literally decades, that had helped
Wow.
shape public policy to support business owners like me. And so that was a really powerful introduction to serving on a board. So that was the first board that I officially served on that wasn't, like my student ambassadors in college or things like that. The first kind of adult, it felt like, board
Yeah.
responsibility.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's neat. Well, yeah, I mean, Angel Oak, our belief is that nonprofits can change the world, right? And
Mhm.
that's a small, and not small necessarily in the scheme of, in this, maybe it's small in the scheme of the worldwide issues, but that's a huge example for just half the population, right? Of how it makes a huge difference in even just their own agency, right? Even in your own ownership of something. So yeah,
That's right.
yeah, and that's what I love about nonprofits is that each one has its own mission and it works diligently towards that goal. So speaking of goals, let's talk a little bit about this crazy idea of your plan, your goal, your goals on one page. What's that about?
So the idea of fitting your goals onto one page. So I mentioned that I research achievement. I've always been interested in professional development, or said in a plain language way, what can help adults to achieve.
Yeah.
Look at education, especially K through 12, is almost like collecting knowledge that we can use. But my focus in professional development is more about kind of unlocking potential. So the assumption that, you, David, as an amazing adult with a variety of experiences under your belt, it's not necessarily about knowledge collection for you. It's how do we activate the skills that you have towards
Right.
specific goals, leveraging the experience that you have. So that's my background and focus. And what I found really interesting as I continued to research this and in my work, just speaking with folks who had achieved really big things, I noticed a pattern. I noticed some things that achievers would do to activate their skills and to work on really big goals. And I noticed that when I would put this pattern in place for folks, so if I met somebody, say you came to me, David, and you said, I have a really big goal, help me learn this pattern that you've seen in others. If I tried to help you enact it, I learned pretty quickly that it can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
And that if folks get overwhelmed with it, they're likely to kind of abandon it and say, never mind, I don't think this goal was the right fit.
Right.
So pretty early on, I learned not only do I have to help folks understand this pattern, these steps that are really helpful to take, but I have to make sure to do it in a way where they don't get overwhelmed. And so that's where the one page became really important, almost as important, maybe even more so than teaching folks the how-to. The pattern became this obsession with doing it in a way that folks weren't overwhelmed, so that
Mm.
they could stay on track. So that's where it came from.
Well, talk about the application to the nonprofit sector. What does that look like? I mean, most nonprofits have a 3 to 5 year strategic plan, right? And it's usually a behemoth, right? It's usually a pretty large document that is super detailed and can be costly if it's paid for, and can be valuable. I mean, I don't want to diminish the value of a strategic plan, right? But it can take a lot of resources, a lot of capacity, and often, sadly, can sit on a shelf or in a digital folder, right, in some computer somewhere, and maybe get opened once a year at the board meeting to kind of say, okay, where are we? So how does what you're talking about maybe apply to the nonprofit who is, maybe like most nonprofits has limited capacity and wants to make a huge impact and stay focused?
Yeah. It's a great question. And I think in your question are so many of the reasons that we should be talking about this for nonprofits. You mentioned the binder, right? And we can all think of it, whether it's metaphorical or it
Right.
actually exists for your organization, the binder. It sits on a shelf. And I'm not saying that what's in that binder isn't helpful. I know sometimes
Right.
folks get offended and they say, no, I've gone through the binder process. I've gone through all those exercises and they can be really, really beneficial. And they can, absolutely. But what I like to stress to folks is that for most people within your organization, so maybe the executive director likes to have that binder and that helps to keep her, in line and in alignment with a lot of what the organization has set out to do. But for most of the other stakeholders, for your staff members, for your board members, for your volunteers, for the stakeholders, for the folks you serve, they don't need the binder. But what they
Right.
do need is direction. They absolutely need direction. And I'll use my example of the National Association of Women Business Owners, NAWBO. I mentioned that was the first board that I served on in a real kind of professional adult capacity. They were very patient with me because I made some big mistakes as a new board member. It was my first kind of real experience on that board, and I tried. I was so eager to help.
Yeah.
And so I brought with me, what do new board members bring in droves?
I
Ideas. Yeah. No, no shortage of ideas, right? So
I
as a
know.
board member, I'm so pumped up about this organization, about this mission. I'm excited to serve. And so as I start to hear about challenges, I'm spitting out ideas like I'm giving away free frisbees
What
at
about
a
this?
fair,
What
right?
about that?
We could try this, we could try that, right? And we're laughing about it because we know now,
Yeah.
thanks to our work with nonprofits, that it's not that those ideas are bad, or it's not that we don't want people to have ideas. It's not that. It's just that organizations, nonprofits have limited capacity, and
Yeah.
often they have a rich history. A lot of the ideas that I was spitting out, they had tried before, and it wasn't that
Right.
the ideas weren't good. They didn't have the resources, whether that's volunteers or board members or staff or funds or time or energy, whatever resource, they didn't have the resources to follow those ideas up. And so I saw early in my career and from those hard-earned lessons that it's not that we just need ideas. We need to have a really strong direction so that whether an idea is good or not, that's not really the question. It's, is it in line with where we're trying to go? If we're really clear on that North Star,
Yeah.
and the ideas, we can evaluate them against whether or not it's going to help us get there. I like to use the metaphor of a tank of gas.
Yeah.
You have your car and it's all filled up, but you don't know where you're going. You can burn fuel, you can drive around in circles, right? But if you know where you're going, not only are you going to use that fuel well, you're probably not going to have to use all of it.
Right.
And so it's helping folks to make sure that that destination is clear and
Yeah.
make sure that that destination is clear. We don't need the binder. Now, again, the executive director, she may need it in order to help get clarity on that, but to communicate it to others and to get support from others on that direction, we really don't need more than a single page. And if we want folks referencing it and leveraging it, then we absolutely don't want more than a single page.
So for a nonprofit, what goes on that page? What's the content of that page? What does that look like?
Yeah, I can break it down in a couple sections. And
Okay.
if you're listening and this is like, oh, I got to go grab a sheet of paper. You don't have to. You can just imagine a sheet of paper. It's that simple. You can
Right.
don't feel like you have to go run for a pen. But at the top, we want to make sure that our mission is really clear. And for individuals, I say your goal should be as unique as your fingerprint. So for
Yeah.
organizations, it should be really unique. So there are lots of nonprofits that have overlapping missions. So making sure that you're so clear that no name except the name of your organization could go at the top. Being that clear, okay, who do we serve and what are we doing to serve
Right.
that community? And then I like asset-based mindset. So thinking about what are the assets that you have? What are the skills or resources that your organization has? And again, this just goes on the top. We're just getting really clear about who we are as an organization. So
Yeah.
here's our mission, here's who we serve, and here are the assets we have. Maybe we have a really clear need. Maybe we have robust volunteer support. Maybe we have robust community support. Maybe we have access to federal funding. What are the resources that we have? So
Right.
listing that right on the top. And then in the middle, we want to get clear about the current goals that we have. So the binder is dangerous because the binder is like, here's where we want to be in 10 years, 8 years, 5 years, 3 years. What I like to suggest to organizations is think about a digestible amount of time. That's different for every organization, but for many, it's 1 or 2 years because you're talking
Yeah.
about over the next board year. And so on that amount of time, what are some clear milestones that you need to hit that directly connect to that mission? And so not
Yeah.
the 10-year, but over the next year or two, we want to increase our membership to XYZ. We want to get a healthier revenue or not revenue, excuse me. We want
Yeah.
to make sure that we have
Revenue's
funds.
good, even
Yeah.
for a nonprofit.
Yeah. And so whatever those strategic are in that digestible amount of time and breaking it down into 3 or 4 dates can be really helpful. So like here
Mm.
are the things we're going to do in the next 3 months, 6 months, and year would be really helpful. And just outlining a couple of those and making sure that those really tie to that mission that you had at the top. And then
Yeah.
toward the bottom, we just want to outline who's helping us with this. So what does our board, staff, volunteer, stakeholder support look like? Who's going
Yeah.
to be directly tying to some of these? And we have to be really creative here. For some nonprofits, it can be really helpful to think about mentors or
Yeah.
advocates who might not be serving on the board right now or who are directly tied to volunteer work, but they're advocates for your organization and leveraging them and making sure that they're clear on what you're working on so that they can amplify that out into the community. So that would be my one page for for most volunteer organizations. We can tweak that as needed. But what's nice is if you look at that, if say David and I we're working on a nonprofit and we
Yeah.
wake up on a Wednesday morning, we're like, what are we going to focus on today? We can look at that and remember really quickly, okay, if I'm serving this group and I'm trying to hit these goals in the next 3 to 6 months, and I know I have these people to help, I know what outreach or what tasks I need to work on today.
Sure. Yeah, we're very aligned in that with at Angel Oak. It's, one of we used to really focus on these big comprehensive, sometimes overwhelming kind of annual marketing strategies, right? And
Mhm.
what we found is that, it's full of good ideas, it's full of good suggestions, recommendations, all of those things. But what we found most of the time is the average nonprofit just didn't have the capacity or the resources to act on it. And so rather than feel like they're failing by not fulfilling the plan, they avoid it and don't even, they get paralyzed, right? They get paralyzed by this sense of of failure. And, I think what we found over the last few years is to say, you know what, let's knock that down to 2 or 3 pages and not a 12-page plan, right? And
Yeah.
let's really focus on what are those top goals you've got the next year, and how do we help move you closer to those on a quarterly basis, right? And that very similar, let's take smaller chunks with a clear time frame, with clear deliverables, clear goals, and then, let's reset every 3 months because of Hurricane Helene, because of new administrations, because of unexpected succession needs, all of those things, right, happen every day at nonprofits. And, you spend $6,000, $7,000 and hours of time building whether it's a strategic plan or whether it's a marketing plan that is likely maybe not going to be irrelevant, but maybe not as clear
Yeah.
after some incident, right? After some,
I mean, if you think about the math of it, let's imagine that this time 5 years ago, we just wrapped up a process of paying, a healthy five-figure amount for someone to help us create a 5-year plan. That would have been, the couple months leading into 2020. How
yeah.
much of that plan would have been relevant even as that binder was printed?
So
So
how so how do we so how do we change a mindset, right, from that and without undermining the need for a longer term strategy, right? So what is that? What's that conversation like when you go, whether it's a for-profit or a nonprofit business, a nonprofit organization that you're working with, and they say, yeah, but we need to know, where we're going in the next 5 years. Our donors want to know, our board members want to know. What's that conversation look like?
yeah, it's a lot more fun to have with nonprofits because when we talk about a conversation like that where we need to shift mindsets or get alignment, we can always go back to wait, why are we doing this? And the
Right.
answer in nonprofit spaces, it's so much more fun to answer that than some of the other spaces where I work.
Because we need more widgets. That's
It's not because we need more widgets, right? It's like,
right.
okay, let's come back to, as we think about the mission of, XYZ nonprofit, the reason we're here is, and then you have this powerful mission. And if we start there and then we say, okay, so I'm hearing that there are some folks who do still want to know where we're going for 5 to 10 years, we can talk about that and that can be a part of this. But before we dive into that with a mind on limited resources, let's explore why we want to know that. How does knowing where we're going to be in 5 to 10 years help us? And somebody might say, well, I think our donors want to know. Okay, so I think what I'm hearing is that our donors want to know that we have a long-term vision and
Right.
we have big goals coming up. Is there a way that we can describe that succinctly? I mean, it does, that's where it's like, it's not that we throw the binder out the window and never talk about any of those things.
Right.
All we're saying is that we need to be more clear on our immediate next steps and reduce some of the clutter of planning for a time when honestly there are too many unknowns for that plan to be very effective. And so if it helps us, if we feel like donors are going to be happier to work with us if we say that in 5 to 10 years, we want to imagine having a new physical structure and we want to double our membership. We can note that, but we're still going to use the middle of that page to talk about the strategic objectives of the next 3, 9, 12 months or whatever time frame is digestible for
Right.
the organization. So when we get those mindsets that are kind of pushing back against this, I love to first start of, well, let's start from where we can agree. We can agree that our mission is this, and we can
Right.
agree that our resources are limited. If we can get folks to agree to those two things, then any question of like, but wait, don't we need this from the binder? Just asking. So why do we need that? How does that help us having that?
Right.
Other than just, satisfying our curiosity or feeling like we're checking the boxes, what does that do for us? And once
Yeah.
we have that answer, okay, so what can we put on our one page that would satisfy that requirement?
And it also gives a little bit of cover for that Dex Dr. Glova who comes in with some really great ideas to the board, right?
Bless her
And
heart, as we say in the South. That next idea ready, right? You're exactly right. It's a little bit of a shield, not protection. It's not to say
no, I mean
that
ideas are great, right? And
great. And
you got to
yes,
be focused,
comes
right?
in firing hot with a lot of ideas, we can say, you know what, that's great. Our nonprofit has never had a student chapter. What a lovely idea. And as I'm looking at our strategic objectives, I'm not sure that fits in with our next 3, 6, 12-month goals. Can we add that to borrow a corporate term, can we add that to the parking lot? That would be a great idea to revisit if we have robust volunteers on our membership committee and there's a room for an additional project. Let's put it there. Great. What other ideas you can have focusing on these strategic objectives we have for this 3, 6, 12-month time frame?
Yeah. And it also is great. I mean, many, I guess most probably is not correct, but many nonprofit executive directors and CEOs and those sorts are visionaries, right? And, they have the gift, and the curse of dreaming, right? Of having that idealistic, here's what the world could look like, and here's how, we're going to do it. And I think it also helps them to channel that, right? And to say, that is a great dream, it's a great vision, and we're not going to be able to accomplish it tomorrow or in a year
Right.
or maybe ever. But that said, we're going to, focus on making progress towards it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I'm the first. I get distracted by really shiny things
Oh
and
yeah.
and
Squirrel.
ideas. I will go chase a squirrel at a drop of a hat, and that's how I'm set up. But thankfully, our team that we have at Angel Oak, most of them are very focused on process, on timelines, and all the things that kind of make me a little nauseous, to be honest. But thankfully we have a team that's made up like that, where we have some people thinking visionary and out there, and other people really focused on what do we need to get done today. And to me, that's another benefit of these kind of these abbreviated, or these plans on a page, or
That's
that kind
right.
of approach, because you're able to both live in where you live, but still reach the goals of the organization, right? So it's not forcing anybody to kind of change their spots, right?
That's right.
It's meeting them
Right.
where they are. So
Because I'm never gonna
I'm not changing my spots. It's just not.
no, it's not
So
possible. I'm never going to be, I can turn that on if I need to and be a little bit of a process person, but I'm always going to be that dreamer, visionary person. And I love the word that you use, which is it brings a little bit of focus. So
yeah,
I want to highlight that word for a second because what I hear sometimes is folks will say, "Well, I don't want to limit folks to just one page. I don't want to limit the ideas." And I say, it's not a limit, it's a focus. If you think about a really sunny day
right.
and all that light,
Don't hold me back, Sarah.
right, don't hold me back. If you envision like all that light that's shining, if you get a magnifying glass and you
Mm.
focus that, like picture you
Oh,
use
that's a
that
good
little
analogy.
power beam, right? So the one page is like that magnifying glass. There's already so much light. We're not trying to dim it. We're just trying to focus it and look
I
at how
like
much
that.
more powerful that gets.
No, that's great. Um, what what's the first step in an organization who might want to give this a shot, right? Of trying to get I'll call it their strategic plan on one page, right? Or some version of it. How can they take that first step? Do they need to hire you? Do they need to hire somebody? Can they do it internally? What's the practical application?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I never answer it with you need to hire somebody because honestly, sometimes that can be a waste of money if you don't have the foundations in order. And I don't want any nonprofit wasting even a tiny bit of resources.
Amen.
So a simple exercise, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this, David. A simple exercise would be, can you get really clear about where you are now and where you want to be? Can you get really clear on that? And can you get really clear on the 3 to 5 strategic objectives that will get you there? So say you're an
Mm,
organization that's had a lot of board turnover, your membership is declining. So you might say, we're an organization that serves XYZ population, but we're seeing a decline in volunteer support and in membership. So our strategic objectives are, and then like, what are the 3 to 5 things?
yeah,
That's really important. And I would say it's really important that your current stakeholder support, whether that's staff, volunteer, board, folks you serve, that folks agree on that. That
yeah,
in general, we might not agree on what the specific objectives are of how we're going to navigate that, but we can agree on the statement of here's who we are and where we are now, and here's where we want to go. I think
yeah,
that's a really, it's hard for you could be the best consultant that's ever consulted in the history of consulting. But if you're working with an organization that can't agree on that statement, you're going
yeah,
to struggle to drive any value, no matter how much they pay you. So for an organization, it's do we feel like we have alignment and agreement on that? That's where I would start.
yeah. No, that's good. I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, I've seen that trip up a number of organizations, right? Who I think but if you ask them before they went into their annual board meeting or whatever, right, that are you in alignment? I think they would say yes. But then when they start drilling down into into the details of it, they find out that some people, not rightly or wrongly, but just
Right.
differently,
Just
that they may
differently.
have their own priorities or their own goals or objectives. So I think that's a great suggestion. I mean, to be able to get to that place, and the analogy or the analogous thing for that for Angel Oak when it comes to marketing is we if we're many times we're asked to rebrand an organization or to come up with a new visual identity, a logo, or any of those things, and what we've learned, sadly through some failures, I think at
Hard
times,
earned. Yeah.
is that if they don't have their foundational messaging, their belief, their mission, their vision, their values clear, when we start to talk about what's this new brand look like or what's this new logo look like, it really it's impossible because they don't have clarity as to who they are or who they're becoming, right? So a lot of them often will say, you come to us asking for a new logo, but let's step back and let's look at what are your foundational messaging elements, right? And let's get those clear, compelling, concise, and consistent before we move into, you know, dreaming about what your new name is or what your new logo
That's
is.
right.
And I think that's a really clear, analogy between those two, a good comparison of what that looks like from our side from a marketing perspective. So I think that's wise,
I
to
think
have
the
that
hard
consensus.
for a lot of groups, the hesitation or even the friction or the struggle that I see is groups that they want to be everything and
Yeah,
they want to do everything.
yeah,
And I relate to this so much. Again, is the like idea of pew, pew, pew with all the ideas. I
right,
relate to this so much. I know what it's like to envision a really powerful, changed world and to imagine that the organizations that I'm working with are going to bring about that change. And you get a little bit of scope creep, to borrow another kind of corporate term, where I'll use the example of the National Association of Women Business Owners. When I introduced you to that group, I focused on the public policy piece.
yeah,
Their mission is to support women business owners. And so who's to say, does that mean they help women start businesses? Does that mean they create referral pipelines? And the answer to that is no. So it's hard to draw that line. What if you have a group that's like, well, we support women business owners. Shouldn't we also be helping women start businesses?
right,
Let's create a whole academy to do that. And it's like, wait, wait, wait. If we think about our mission, we are meant to support the public policy concerns of existing women business owners. And there are
yeah,
already groups that we could partner with, like SCORE, that help people start businesses.
right,
Having that one page to get really clear, it doesn't just help to share what you do, it also helps to eliminate the what you shouldn't do. It
right,
can be really important. And I think the friction comes from people like me who are stubborn and they're like, well, shouldn't we be doing this too, and this, and this, and this, and this?
Right.
And that's a great way to kill an organization is to
Yeah.
try to do everything. And so an exercise I do a lot. And so if anybody's encountering that friction, here's an exercise you can do. I try to get folks to, and apologies for the gross term. I have boys, so we use words like this, but you word vomit is what we call it.
Yeah.
Just word vomit all of the possibilities to the point where it's so overwhelming that people recognize like this boulder is so heavy. It's not just that we can't lift it. No one could lift this. No
Right.
one can do. You could be the most resourced organization in the world, and no one could do all of this. And
Yeah.
so it's permission to say, wait, we don't, it's not even that we don't have to do everything, it's that we literally can't.
Right.
And so the work of this organization and specifically this board and this staff is to figure out what are the right things for us to be
Yeah.
focusing on right now. We can't do everything.
And
No.
how do you do those things better, right? I mean, it's, is if and some nonprofits have it nailed, right? They're crushing their processes, they're doing all those things. And maybe that's the time where they say, we've got this pretty well solved, right? Let's think about what's the next thing that we can focus on, right? That's going to help us move forward, help us better serve the people that we're focused, that we've committed to serve. But until, a nonprofit, I think, gets to that place, because a lot of times we'll, and again, everything for me goes back to marketing, right? So, a lot of times with marketing, they're like, well, we really need to be on TikTok. I'm like,
Yeah,
well, how's your Facebook performing? It's not
you
great.
have that one. That's
Yeah, right,
boring. Tell me about the shiny
or
squirrel.
how's your LinkedIn going? What? We don't even have a link, whatever, right? And I'm like, okay, well, yeah, TikTok's great. It's awesome. And if you have the resources to go about that, that's great. But let's focus on what you're doing now and really get to that place where, you're able to look at that and say, you know what, this is a machine now. It's working. We got it. Then let's think about that next thing. Otherwise, you're just going to create two mediocre at best, kinds of initiatives. So,
You're
yeah,
so
again, I
right.
think that's very parallel to our thinking. Um,
Yeah. You have a
what?
market background, so I think you'll appreciate this example. You know, Stan Phelps, he's one of my
Oh
favorite
yeah,
speakers and local to the Triangle, amazing researcher on marketing and customer
the
experience.
the fishbowl guy, right?
Purple goldfish.
Yeah,
Yes. Speaking of marketing, I mean, he's marketing head to toe, literally with his car wrapper and his
I
glasses.
know,
I mean,
right?
and I'm lucky I've been able to observe his
I think
career.
he's starting to look like a goldfish, even maybe.
Nah, he's a fashionable one, maybe.
He's
Yeah,
like Mr. Limpet, if
fashionable
those who
goldfish.
might remember that.
And his marketing is on point, but more so there's a point that you just made about it's not just what are the gaps, but also what are we already doing that we could do better. So he has a great talk about marketing and customer experience, and in it he points out that most organizations look at what they're doing and say, what are the gaps, what are we not doing that we need to start doing.
Yeah,
An exceptionally improved return on investment is what are we already doing that we could be doing a little bit better?
yeah.
And hearing that
That's
from him for me a few years ago as an entrepreneur was huge, especially an entrepreneur that loves squirrel, right? I'm all like,
right.
"Yeah, I need to be on TikTok. I need to be, right?" And so instead, when I get that impulse, really questioning like what are the strategic objectives I have in front of me right now for the next few months and years that will support. And if the answer is none, I shouldn't do it. And also, is it really better for me to go to do that new thing versus investing in improving what I'm already doing? And I
Yeah,
learned from Stan how crucial that question is because we get such a huge return on investment if we focus on making what we're already doing a little bit better.
yeah, yeah. And I struggle with that too, because yeah, I'm like, let's try this. And
Yeah,
other than,
squirrel.
hey, how do we incrementally improve what we're doing? And the odds of the ROI on that, right? Because it's fewer resources needing to be dedicated. It's an easier lift. It's all
We
of those
have
things.
probably some buy-in, some
Right,
traction. Absolutely.
right. So
Yeah.
I think that's great.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, what from that, how often, is it, I guess, is it taboo to change that one page after a few months or maybe a year or whatever? Is that,
I am so glad you asked that. Thank you so much for asking that because I
yeah,
think I'm so bought in on the one page. And so the way I talk about it, I kind of put it in on a
Is
pedestal a
it,
little bit. And
yeah,
so
is it like scripture? Should you
it's
never
like,
write it?
thank you. Exactly. So the way I talk about it, it's almost like scripture, right? Like the
Right.
holy document, which is a bit, sorry for the blasphemy, but and so I will talk to organizations who they'll say like, we heard your TED talk, or we heard you on the Angel Oak Creative podcast. We created our one page, and then they'll send me a picture of it, and it'll be framed. And I'm like, no, take it. Like it shouldn't have. This is the thing you fold up in your back pocket. You spill
Right. That's
coffee
funny.
on it. A couple weeks go by and you update it. A lot of the boards that I currently volunteer on, instead of like an agenda for each board meeting, the first page is our one-page plan. And in
Yeah.
the board meeting, we might make little tweaks to it. Now,
Right.
we're not, to be clear, we are not creating a new one-page plan every time we talk.
Sure.
But we might be, as we meet objectives, we roll some off
Right.
and put new ones on. And as
Yeah.
we update the access to resources that we have, or the stakeholders who are supporting us, I mean, this is a living document.
Right.
That's the difference between this is and a binder, right? The
Right.
binder sits on the shelf, the framed
It's
certificate.
almost impossible to change, right? I mean, nobody,
Exactly.
yeah, nobody's gonna like strike through something in the binder because
The,
it's so
the
official.
holy binder.
Yeah,
Yes,
I know,
absolutely.
right?
Never.
I know.
No,
Don't touch
this
that.
is meant, it's a living document. I know you will understand this reference. My students sometimes don't. I talk about printed MapQuest directions sometimes.
Oh yeah.
Like,
Oh
what
yeah.
but my husband and I, we hiked through Italy when I finished grad school, and we were very low on resources at that time, extremely low. And so I had printed out MapQuest directions to get us from each train station to each hostel, because God forbid we spend money on a taxi, right? That was
Right.
pizza money. And so on the back of those MapQuest directions, I kept track of like our purchases and how much money we had left and things. And so of course, those MapQuest, they're folded, they have the crease lines, they have the pencil marks and the markouts. They
Yeah.
probably have a little bit of coffee spilled on them, maybe some wine. And that is what I picture when I talk about it. It's helping you get to where you need to go. It's in the trenches with you. We update it as needed because it's meant to serve you, not the other way around.
Right.
Thank you for asking that question to
Yeah.
help us envision how
So it's,
often
yeah.
we be alive. Yeah.
I mean, and to your point, I mean, it's almost a, and again, forgive the war analogy, but it's like a battle plan, right? I mean, you're not, it's nothing if that battle plan is not pulled out and used, you're going to get defeated, right? You've got to know what each person on your team is doing and how they're going to achieve success. And I think that's an interesting,
There's no way to know that sometimes except to try. And I
right?
say a lot of times, especially to my students, you can't learn to swim from a book. Eventually, you
Yeah,
have to jump in. And so that's another reason you could spend months, years on a binder. You can't spend months or years on a one page. You're going to really struggle to spend that amount of time. And that's part of it, because at the end of the day, you just have to say, good enough. Let's try for a little while and reassess.
yeah,
Some point you got to start collecting data on what's working and what isn't. That's the
yeah,
only way to put a plan into place. You can't sit and try to get it perfect first. You have to start trying. So that's another reason the one page is so important, is because it does force you to start taking that action and starting to learn from, yeah, like you said, almost like in a battle plan.
yeah.
Mhm.
Is there a quick example you could share of just maybe how this has been activated for a nonprofit? And you don't have to use names if you'd not prefer not to, but
Yeah, I am
what
going to use a
what
name, but it's because I'm singing their praises, and
okay, let's
you'll
do
get
it.
the pun in a second because I said I'm singing their praises.
Okay.
I love a dad joke. I got a chance to work with an amazing organization based in Durham called Kids Notes.
Yep.
So they support music education for youth. And it was so cool to see them go through this process of not specifically the one page plan, but I had a chance to work with them on their strategic plan. And they were very bought into the idea that their strategic plan needed to be a living discussion amongst stakeholders, and that it was meant to be that North Star. And if you
Hmm.
think about, for an organization like Kids Notes, there are so many ways that they can support kids' interest in and involvement in music.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways that they can go about that. And they were so bought into the idea that they needed to make their mission and values so clear that as they were thinking about options, about ways to move forward, it would be easy to say yes or no to something because they could quickly evaluate it based on their values and their mission. And you said
Yeah.
earlier, A lot of organizations assume that everyone's on the same page. They did some really challenging but valuable exercises to make sure that that shared language was clear. When they
Yeah.
were talking about a value of joy, what does
Mm.
that mean and look like? How are
Yeah.
we going to measure that? I mean, the shared language that they focused on getting across their stakeholders was really valuable. They have a wonderful executive director. He's done so much to push this work forward. They have a really robust history, amazing alums that come back and support parents, volunteers, and then of course the kids and
Yeah.
those musicians. So really powerful to see what a difference these conversations can make for an organization like that.
That's awesome. Well, as we wrap up here, what one or two things do you want to make sure people heard today? What's one or two takeaways that you'd like them to leave with?
Yeah, I think I'll keep it as simple as I can, and I'll just say one, just a reminder, you can't do everything, and it's not because your organization is lacking. No organization can do everything. Even one with all the resources in the world still has finite time. There is
Yeah.
no organization that can do everything.
Yeah.
So giving yourselves permission to put that down and to admit wonderfully, like we can't do everything. We will not just exist, but thrive if we can focus on doing the things that are most crucial to our mission, that are in alignment with the resources that we have and the direction that we want to go in a way that activates the community that we serve. And so I hope that the one page provides one format to consider that, but whether you use one page or not, just going forth with that reminder, we can't do everything. It's going to be so much more important and valuable for us to focus on the things that we can do. That's this work, I think.
Yes. Uh, yeah, I mean, I hope we've inspired some people to maybe think outside the binder and
Think
to
outside the binder. There's our hashtag, David.
to think about maybe approaching their plan a little differently, or maybe even radically differently than what they're used to. How can people learn more about you, Dr. Sarah Glova?
Yeah, there's a lot of Sarahs out there. There's not many Sarah Glovas. Remember my name, the coordinator.
I have a feeling there's only one Dr. Sarah Glova. So,
I hope so. My name rhymes with supernova. I have a number of international students that are concerned with pronunciation, so I learned a long time ago. Sarah Glova rhymes with supernova. Also happens to be very catchy. So if you can't remember me, remember supernova, and you can
well,
look
if you
it up.
do build a brand, maybe the supernova is part of your logo.
And
So,
Angel Oak could help me design a logo
yes, we can talk about that.
that would look better than whatever I made in Canva. For
Oh,
sure.
no.
So the easiest way to find me is LinkedIn or Instagram, and I do have a TEDx about how to achieve your goals with a single page that focuses more on an individual's experience, but you're welcome to look that up. And I'd love to connect with folks. So if you have questions or thoughts after listening, feel free to reach out.
And you're available to help people with their one page. I know that that wasn't your mission for being here, but that is something that you are able to do. Is that correct?
That's right. Thank you for that shout out.
Sure. Yeah. And thanks everybody for listening. We love, well, I shouldn't say, I don't know. I love this podcast. I love doing it. I love these interviews and
Y'all
these.
are pretty well ranked. I think you can
So,
say people love this podcast.
I don't know. I'm grateful for every ear that comes to listen to us. But yeah, just grateful for that. Be sure to check out our previous episodes. This is our third season, which is kind of hard to believe. We've had some great conversations with some amazing nonprofit leaders. And, you can learn more about Angel Oak Creative at our website, angeloakcreative.com. And following us on LinkedIn and Facebook. I'm a LinkedIn nerd, so I tend to hang out there. I think that's where Sarah and I connected. So do that. But Sarah, thank you so much for your time, for all the work that you do, the impact that you make on nonprofits, for businesses. We appreciate you being an important part of our community.
Yeah, that's really nice. Thank you. And thank you for all you do. Huge fan of Angel Oak Creative, and so glad that you're located here in the Triangle. As I can see, for those watching on YouTube, you have a wonderful background. I can see
Yes.
that now. Glad you're here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon.